Right, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. What I've now done is I've crossed over the road and I'm continuing to walk in an easterly direction. What I'm doing now is going past a piece of open space called Altab Park. And this was once the burial ground on the site of a church called St Mary Matfelon. And before it was the Church of St Mary Matfelon, the chapel was built here about 800 years ago, a very modest building which they painted with whitewash just to serve the needs of the local community, who are really an extension of the village of Stepney, which is somewhere ahead of us. So they built a chapel here, and then in 1338 they enlarged it. They built a much more solid building, a church dedicated to St Mary, and the money put up for this was by a family called Matfelon, so they've called it St Mary Matfelon ever since. The church was rebuilt and redesigned over the centuries, as indeed churches are. And you can see here they very helpfully put up a little history of the local church. They've got there a plan of two churches. I won't go into it all now, but they've also got it written down in Bengali, which obviously will be helpful for many of the local inhabitants. So, the church, as I say, the reason why there's no church here at the moment is that the church was struck by a bomb. It was a direct hit during the Blitz in 1940. And the church was just smashed to pieces. So rather than rebuild it, they just dedicated this piece of open ground to the benefit of the local community. And then they renamed it after a local resident, a man called Altab, who was from the Bengali community. There are quite a number of people from the Bengali community in this part of London. And I'm going to make my way up here towards the London Hospital. Or it should probably, correct myself, the Royal London Hospital. It's been the Royal London Hospital ever since 1990, but it was founded as the London Hospital in the 18th century. So, this area is very heavily populated by Bengali people. There are something like 650 Bengalis now living in the United Kingdom, and half of them live in London. Of course, many of them live in this particular part of London as well. And they came here originally. There's a population of people known as the Lascars. Now, these are people from what was then India, China even, just Asian men who were working on the British ships or in the British Merchant Navy. They had their own settlement in East London. And then we had a massive influx of Bengali people from the 1970s onward. Now here, just to pause, is the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. The manufacture of bells, the casting of bells, was a local industry. And the Whitechapel Bell Foundry was founded in 1570 and moved to this site in 1738. It was here they cast the bells for many of the churches around the country and churches in what were then England's colonies. And for that reason, the Liberty Bell, which is in Philadelphia, was cast here. And a bit later on, they cast the bell called Big Ben, which is now in the clock tower of the House of Parliament. Anyway, this bell foundry, sad to say, was closed down in the year 2017, so it's no longer in business. That's sad, but that's just the way things go. This is London after all, and we have to keep moving, and we're a city that is always changing. And I'm now on the south side of the street, and what I'm doing is moving up towards Whitechapel Underground Station. Sorry, my camera is wobbling around all over the place. So, unsurprisingly, you'll see a number of people from Bangladesh. You've got Muslim Aid here. You've got a number of Islamic organisations, as you would expect. I say, London has been open to all sorts of waves of immigration over hundreds of years. The first people to come, of course, were the Flemings from what is now northern Belgium. After that came the Huguenots. They settled in Spitalfields, mostly, but they were here as well. We had Jews here from the early 1800s. And I say we now have a very strong Muslim population. This is the London Muslim Centre. And just to prove it, you can see by this notice on the front of the building. And then next door to it, what we have is the East London Mosque. Down there, over on the left, the East London Mosque. And I understand that the mosque and the Muslim Centre have a capacity for something like 7,000 worshippers, which is pretty formidable, really, when you will consider. Right, we'll carry on. It's agreeable to see so many trees, actually, here. We have, within Greater London, I am assured, somebody went and counted them all. Greater London is spread out over some 607 square miles. And somebody took a task upon themselves to count all the trees in Greater London. And they came up with a grand total of 8.5 million. That's one of the things that makes London bearable, I think. It's an agreeable city to live in, with so much variety, but having the trees really refreshes the environment. You also have these open spaces like the one behind us, Altab Park. That's just one of many. The 40% of the land area of Greater London is given over to parks and gardens and other open spaces. And again, that makes London an agreeable place in which to live. Now, there's a school on the left-hand side, or the ground of a school, which I rather doubt, the Foundation School. And if I recall, that's an 18th century foundation. It no longer is a school, of course. They've actually moved out of here, as indeed so many have. So that's again it doesn't give a date, which is a bit annoying. We'll move forward. And what we're now doing is heading along towards the London Hospital. When I get right up to the London Hospital, then I'll cross over the road into Whitechapel Underground Station. Now, in this part of London, what you have along the Whitechapel Road is a market, but it's only in business from Monday through to Saturday, so they're not in business today. What we'll do is just turn around the corner here, And a little way down, we've got a place called Mount Terrace, which marks an artificial hill that was built here at the time of the English Civil War. That was in the 1640s. London at that time came out on the side of Parliament against the King. So London, they built a defensive fortifications around London, of which included 13 bastions, of which this was one, the Whitechapel Mount. You can't see it at the present moment. They levelled it in the early 1800s, but it stood here, and as I say, it was one of the defences against the King's army. Now, we've got a piece that talks a lot about local history and the history of London and the history of Whitechapel. We've got a piece of rather interesting Russian history here. If you look across the way, you can see Fulbourne Street, that very large white building where they have the Durward dinner. The Durward Diner, I think it is. That was a socialist club in Victorian times, and Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky all met here in May of 1907 for the 5th Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. They attended here. They really wanted to register for the Congress itself. It was too large to actually accommodate in this building. They went off to a place in Hoxton. But this is part of the history of Russia, in particular Soviet Russia. They met here in 1907, and they worked for the overthrow of the Tsarist regime, which task they accomplished. Now, over on my right-hand side, we are now approaching the London Hospital. And I said you have the market here, which you still have. It's still here, but it's Monday to Saturday. It's not here today because it's a Sunday. Across the road, behind the tree, you have here you will see where they're actually flying beyond the tree, over on the left-hand side, UK International Saris. They're flying the Bengali flag. That is the large green flag with a red circle on it. And that marks the site of one of the penny gaffs. There were plenty of penny. These were just cheap entertainments for local people. They'd just be, just cheap clowning, basically, juggling and so forth. But what made that penny gaff so interesting is that was the place where they exhibited a man known as Joseph Merrick, who was the elephant man. He'd sadly been born with a number of deformities that had completely distorted the shape of his body. And he had to walk around basically with a sack over his head so that he wouldn't frighten the ordinary people, but they exhibited him in that building, right opposite the hospital, which is here. And a man called Sir Frederick Treves, Dr. Sir Frederick Treves, came out and rescued him from the penny gaffs. And they took him into the hospital, and the hospital accommodated him here until he died in 1890. He was only 28 years old. His deformities meant that his life expectancy was very seriously curtailed. But where they have that UK International Sari and Gold Jewellers. That was the site of one of the original penny gaffs. And here we have the London Hospital. Let me just give you a closer I keep calling it the London Hospital. I shouldn't. It's the Royal London Hospital, and it was founded originally in 1740. It moved to this site in 1757. It was regarded as the finest hospital of the age. A medical college opened up here in 1854, and that medical college attracted a man called Thomas Barnardo, who was a young Irishman who came all the way to London to study medicine with the intention of going off to China and becoming a medical missionary. When he came to London, he was horrified when he saw all the vast number of destitute children, and so he created a special shelter for destitute children, sort of orphanage really, and that became Dr. Barnardo's Homes, and it's now known as the charity Barnardo's, which looks after the interests of children. Now here again we've got the lights against us, so I can't walk over. Well, I could, but I don't want to. And directly ahead of us we have Whitechapel Station. And even more interestingly enough, we now have the premises that were occupied by the Working Lads Institute. Now, why this is important is because this is the place where they had the inquest into the deaths of Martha Tabram, Mary Nichols, and Annie Chapman. The Working Lads Institute had been created in the early 1880s as a place for the benefit of young men to set themselves up in trade in some sort of useful, productive career, so they make good citizens and good parents. And it's here ever since. They had a gymnasium. Well, you can see they've got here, if you look very carefully, they have the entrance to the lecture hall and the entrance to the, you can just make it out, the gymnasium. So it's all very healthy. The idea was to lure them away from the temptations of the theatre and the theatre and the pubs and so all the other drinking dens and all other vice and iniquity. Right, here, this is Whitechapel Station, and I propose to go through the Whitechapel Station to get onto the trains. But before I do that, what I really want to do is go down one of the passageways that runs beside the station that will take us out into Durward Street. Durward Street used to be known as Bucks Row, and it was in Durward Street that Mary Ann Nichols, sometimes known as Polly Nichols, was murdered in the early hours of Friday morning, the 31st of August, 1888. And she was certainly one of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Now, years and years ago, before they built the station, there was a right-of-way that had been established across here, which they've obviously had to maintain, and it led directly from Whitechapel Road into Durward Street. And this must have been the route that Mary Ann Nichols took when she took the man who murdered her into this side street. So much of Jack the Ripper's London, which has now been knocked down and has disappeared. There's a lot to see actually, and I can point it out to you as we go along. But we're now making our way. They changed the name from Bucks Row into Durward Street because the residents of Bucks Row didn't really like the association with the murder. So they appealed to the local authorities, who then changed the name. So just turn around here. Right, we're looking down Durward Street. You can see all these modern residential properties that have gone up. And what we're now doing is looking down to the site on the pavement, which is where the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered on that fateful morning. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. What I'm going to do now is make our way back into the station, and I'm going to go home. But what I wanted to do was just give you an idea of how Whitechapel is laid out, so that if you're visiting London, or you're maybe not necessarily a foreign visitor, you may just be somebody who's British and you want to find out where the various murder sites are, I think the first thing you need to do is to acquaint yourself with the area. And that's what I hope I've done, just to give you some idea of how the area is laid out and what there is to see and do here and all the major landmarks. And as you can see for yourself, it's not all Jack the Ripper. There's a lot of other stuff here, and we could really go on and on and on about other aspects of living in Whitechapel. But for the time being, I'm focusing on the murders, and what I want to do a bit later on, my next video, I'll be introducing those and then starting off with the murder of Martha Tabram. Anyway, as you see, as I turn around now, we come to the gates, and here what I do is just make my tap and go through, and this is where I turn off. So thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in the next video introducing Jack the Ripper.